No, we're far enough south that few tree limbs. It was mostly just like little clumps of leaves and stuff. That was about it. Like it didn't do any damage where we're at. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some places in Bella Vista that got some damage. Uh huh. But I got to clean up anyway. Yeah. Everybody's hoping for Friday. Everybody's hoping to have power back by Friday.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Around the outside of the house.
Mm-hmm.
So my extension cord only reaches so far.
Yeah.
I can't use it in the kitchen.
Okay.
So yesterday I made buckwheat waffle mix and took my waffle maker out to the garage to the extension cord.
Okay.
Waffle.
Well, do you need an extension cord?
Another extension cord?
If anybody has like 100-foot one, I'd be grateful.
Just take
I
the
think
one
how
that we've
long
got
mine
right now,
is.
right? I mean, we have one here at Flagstone. It's not.
Yeah.
100 feet,
Yeah. I don't know. We'll look. We'll look and see how long it is before you leave today. I've got an electric skillet, like a. Well, yeah. I got an electric skillet, and I got like the griddle that you do like pancakes and stuff on. I got that.
but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yeah. Let me.
your garage is just gonna be your thing.
Yep. I can after class today. I can run by the house and grab some stuff and bring it to you. Sure thing.
I'll check here, and we can check right after and see how long the one that we have, or the extension cord is.
Yeah.
If not, we can figure that
Jason
out.
Cadmus will be like, "What happened to my extension cord? I'm trying to vacuum here."
There's a tragedy, Jason. Come on.
All of my yard stuff is with batteries.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yep.
Right.
Batteries.
So all of my batteries are
Are dead. Yeah. Yeah. Into something. Yeah. Do you have a multi-plug that you can use? Okay.
We have
That I've got.
I will say we have that here.
I've got.
then I could plug, my
I'm saying at my house, I've got a tub full of just smaller extension cords and multi-plugs. So I can definitely bring that to you, for sure.
You definitely charge more with the generator
Mm-hmm.
than I'm currently charging.
Yep.
It's doing both refrigerators and the upright freezer.
Yep.
Both very important.
Yes. Yep. Okay. We'll work on it after class today. I'll get some stuff
Make
to
it
you
happen.
for sure. Okay. Good morning, everyone.
And
Looks
everybody
like-
that's
and everybody that's watching
for
online.
sure. A lot of people
I
probably.
mean, they're watching on their phones or something because they don't have power. But man, what a turn of events. We were just talking a minute ago. My son Griffin and Brianna got married this weekend,
yeah.
and it was
It
was
happened.
great. It was beautiful weather. You know, it was an outdoor event. Just everything went great. And you know, later on that night, sometime after midnight, was when everything started falling apart for everybody. The storms hit, and Sunday was a chaotic day, and yesterday was a weird Memorial Day, and here we are today, still trying to clean up, and it's raining outside. So you know, we'll survive though, right? And honestly, there's been a lot of I guess destruction, if you want to call it that, in Rogers and Bentonville and Decatur and points in between because of the storms over the weekend. But there's been so many stories that have come out of, you know, God's protection over people that seemingly goes beyond explanation. There's been so many stories of just random strangers helping other random strangers, which is really cool. And so of all the things that we hear about on a regular basis, and we've even talked about in this class, of just how negative our culture is, how bad things are in the world, and I'm not saying they're not, but there's still good people, there's still a good God, there's still good things happening. And it's sad that sometimes it takes destructive things to remind us of that, but I'm glad we get reminders, you know, of how good people are. So, so I don't know if you want to
sometimes
add your
it takes
2 cents worth to that.
That's kind of what I was feeling talking with Laurie and stuff. I mean, you saw all the trees and stuff that were down on their property. It's like all of that tragedy would be doubled if you're alone, you know, if you don't have anybody. But then to see all of the community, both church community, you know, family, stuff from
Just the
school, and all
city.
that, like literally the city and all of that, like, it's so terrible. It doesn't just make it bearable. It's almost like a blessing that you see. Not that that's a blessing. It's a blessing to see, like, man, look how much that we're cared about, and look what God does in the midst of that tragedy. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it's, if nothing else, and I don't know all God's plans, but I firmly believe that Scripture teaches us that I don't know that, let me interrupt. Let me change how I'm about to say this. I don't know that God sent the storm necessarily, but God's using the storm for good stuff, you know, and I think that's just a powerful reminder for us. Yeah. So for those of you who may be watching us who are not in Northwest Arkansas and don't know anything about it, we had really bad storms starting about 1:30 this past Sunday morning, and took out a whole bunch of trees, some buildings, landing on people's cars, people's houses. And just trying to get out from under all of that has been a chore for people. We got a lot of folks that are still without power. Yeah. Anyway, we are here today to talk, I guess, about more destruction in a way.
But
talk about that. So, if you saw the description of the class, we're calling this newest class series "Flawed Heroes," and just we're going through the Book of Judges. So, if you got your Bibles or your Bible apps, it's in the Old Testament. It's the 6th book of the Bible. And it's one, at least for Brandon and I want to speak for you. It's one of our favorite books, you know. And I've said this multiple times in other places. I really feel like somebody could take, at first I just like pick certain stories out of the book of Judges and make a movie about it. But this could be like a Netflix or Amazon Prime series. Like, you can make a series on the Book of Judges and all the different stories.
It would be like Game of Thrones, kind of, in the following a people and a person's and a family.
But there's intrigue, there's deception, there's conspiracy, there's violence, there's sex, all the things that you're looking for in your movies and your binge watching. It's in the Book of Judges, and this is God's people that we're talking about. So. We're going to go through that starting today. We're going to dive into it today. Flawed heroes, because these judges are people that God raised up to be leaders for His people, and they end up kind of falling under the definition of a hero, at least for some of these. But not, I don't know if all of them are, but several of them have some either physical flaws or character flaws or both. Some of them you would look at and go, that's not a hero, but God used them anyway. And so it's going to be some really cool stories that we go through, and there will be probably some common themes. It's like, once again, we're going through this, but then there's something unique about each one of these folks too. So here in class in the room, Brandon right now is handing out a little kind of study help with a map of the area, like Israel at this time, and also just kind of some, I don't know, illustration of how to kind of wrap your mind around the Book of Judges. So today will be kind of an introductory kind of thing, and kind of setting the stage for what we're talking about. So I'll let I know Brandon's got some good notes on just kind of the background of the book itself. So let me just real quick. I promise I'll do this really quickly. Just kind of bring us to like the book of Judges itself. So the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, tell a story of God creating the earth, God making a connection with, well, we got the flood, then we got a connection with Abraham, and God making his promise to Abraham that he's going to make him into a mighty nation, which ended up becoming the nation of Israel. Israel, the first ancestors of the Israelites go down to Egypt during the famine in a peaceful way and end up over the next few hundred years becoming slaves to the Egyptians. Eventually God sets them free. That's the book of Exodus. We've heard of the 10 plagues. We've seen movies about that, and Moses and Pharaoh and all that, and they go out into the wilderness. God leads them to the wilderness and says, now you're going to be my people, and he gives them this law and says, here's how I want you to live. And honestly, this law that I'm giving you is actually going to be for your benefit. So if you'll do the things that I'm telling you to do, you're going to have a really good life. But if you don't, we're going to have problems. And so Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are all just describing that 40-year journey through the wilderness, because the people immediately, as soon as God has rescued them and has given them rules to live by, they immediately turn their back on him and start worshiping this idol that they made. And God's like, you know what? I'm done with y'all. And Moses kind of begs for God to forgive him, which he does. But as with anything, there's consequences to your choices. So that generation of people, God says, you don't get to go into the promised land, the land that I've given to your ancestors. Your kids will, but you don't get to. And so for the next 40 years, they're just basically walking in circles around the wilderness until that generation dies off. And now...
And Moses.
And now we have a new generation that's led by a guy named Joshua, who is Moses' right-hand man. He leads the people into Canaan, into the promised land that used to belong to their ancestors, but over a few hundred years, other nations have come in and taken over. And so now they're kind of invading, in a way, their own homeland.
Their future homeland.
I'm saying it was, and now it's going to be again.
Yes.
They're trying to drive out all these nations. And that's the book of Joshua, is the Israelites coming into what we call the promised land, which is where modern-day Israel is now, and taking over this territory and driving out all the nations that were there. And so God helped them accomplish that. And then Joshua, who's an old man, gives them one last charge, like, hey, you guys need to be devoted to God and not follow any other gods. And all the people say, we will be committed to God. And Joshua says, you know what? You won't. You can't. It's impossible. You can't do it. He literally says that if you read in Joshua chapter 24. And the Israelites, no, we're serious. Yeah, we really will follow. And he's like, okay, well, we'll see.
I'm serious too.
Yeah. So anyway, Joshua dies. And his generation of people that had kind of driven out all these nations, they all kind of die off. And now we come to the book of Judges.
So I think we've had, who are the major players in the Bible up to this point so far? Like our main characters.
Well, I mean, you got Adam and Eve.
So Adam and Eve.
Noah. Abraham.
That's like the rest of Genesis.
Yeah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Those 3 patriarchs.
Yep, ending with the big story of Joseph and all of that. And then who's the next major player? Moses in the Exodus, okay? Is Moses kind of a big deal?
Huge.
Kind of. Some people thought that there was around like 3 million Israelites, as many as 3 million Israelites that God led out of Egypt and into so that's a lot of people that he's got to take care of and all of that. And so, I mean, Joshua is right there with him the whole time. It's like his protege. So Joshua is learning from Moses the whole time. So you've got these really big, heavy-hitting guys. Then Moses leaves, and so Joshua is the person that's in charge. He's the next heavy-hitting guy. Who's the heavy-hitting guy after Joshua?
The answer is nobody. We don't have any.
Yes.
That's where we come to Judges, right? That's the whole thing.
Right.
There's not this central leader anymore.
Yeah. I'm sure you're going to hit on this. There's a sentence that's said 2 times in Judges that is kind of like I think a key to this whole thing. So I know that we're in the beginning of Judges. Let's scooch over to, actually, you know what? It says it 2 times. Let's go to the very last verse of Judges. Just the very last verse of Judges.
I think I know what you're going to say, and it's going to.
I think.
It's
Oh,
said
whoa,
4
whoa,
times.
4 times. Okay.
4 times. Yeah.
I thought it was only 2.
Yeah.
I like the last one then.
That's
The fourth
fine.
One. Judges chapter 21, verse 25. It's the very last verse in Judges. And it says, Marshall said, it said,
Yeah, we're in Judges chapter 21, verse 25.
It said 4 times, I see right there on your notes, 4
Yep.
times in Judges, kind of more at the end of the book, but this is I think it's the linchpin of the whole story.
Mhm.
Phyllis, you want to say it? In those days,
Mm-hmm.
Israel had what?
No king.
And so because they had no king, what did they do?
Everyone did as he saw fit.
So
Or
you've
what did
got-
your say? What did your say, Days? What was right in his own eyes.
Ooh. So you've got Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham.
It's no that whole verse.
Said it
So
4
I'll just
times.
give you the other ones if you want to write them down. It's similar to. They're all towards the end of the book. It's chapter 17, verse 6. Chapter 18, verse 1. Chapter 19, verse 1. And then here 21, verse 25. So 4 times it's said in some similar way. In those days, Israel didn't have a king. Everyone did as they saw fit.
So this is a bad analogy, but think we've got Abraham, really big, heavy hitter, like just this big central figure, especially in the Old Testament and New Testament, that leads us into Moses, huge central figure, leads an entire people group out of slavery into this new land. Joshua leads this people group, and then all of a sudden, whenever he passes away, there's not a ceremony of like, hey, he wasn't the king anyway. You're the leader. You're the president. There wasn't any of that. And so imagine if in our nation that all of a sudden it just was like, well, I don't really know who the next guy is. And so everybody said, well, let's just try and do right by ourselves, and then we'll be okay. Well, I mean, this nation would crumble very, very quickly. And that's the same case for what happens here in Judges 2.
Yeah, and it's a statement not just of I guess the chaos of just trying to live, among their own clans and tribes and have their own rules for their particular geographical area, but it's also a statement about the morality of Israel. And so, I mean, we'll go ahead and go with this theme since we already introduced it.
Yeah.
The last judge that we have is actually found not in the book of Judges, it's in the book of 1 Samuel. And Samuel is the last judge. So we're fast forwarding to the end of the story so we can kind of set up the start of the story.
With the end.
That's right. So let me show you real quick. You're in Judges. Go over to 1 Samuel chapter 8. When Samuel's a judge and the Israelites come to him and like, we want a king. We want a king like everybody. All these other nations around us have kings. We want a king.
Ugh.
Okay? And they just demanded. And Samuel's like, man, you don't need a king. I'm leading you. God's leading you. And they're like, no. We want a king. So it says in verse 6 that Samuel's upset by this and he prays to God about it. Verse 7, this is what I want y'all to see. And remember, 4 times in Judges, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. Look at verse 7 of 1 Samuel chapter 8. And the Lord told them, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected who? Me, God, as what?
As their king.
As their king. So, multiple times in the book of Judges, the author of Judges says there is no king. Well, what does God say here in 1 Samuel chapter 8? He's the king.
He's been
so,
the king.
if he is the king, but the I guess the status of the people is that they had no king, what does that tell you about the people and their relationship with God? There wasn't one. They kept walking away from it. It's not that they didn't have a king. They have one in God. Well, it's their own. Yes, they're not acknowledging that they have a king. They've had one this whole time. It wasn't like the physical one that sat on the throne of some kind like the other nations around them, but they had a king. They had someone who was leading them, who was telling them, here's how you live your life, who was willing to call the shots for them for their benefit. They had it. But if consistently Scripture says they didn't have one, it's not because there wasn't one there. It's because why? They didn't want to follow him. That's right.
I mean, think right after the Exodus, when they're sitting at the base of Mount Sinai, Moses says, "Hey, guess what? God, he wants to have a relationship. Like he wants to make this like official. He wants to make this official. You are going to be his people, and he will be your God. And then here's the rules for the covenant. So like here's the 10 Commandments, and then you've got lots of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. That's like the law of here's the contract. Okay, if we're going to be in this marriage together, here's the contractual agreement that we both hold up our end, and we're going to be good to go. And just as Marshall said, as they're reading off the marriage vows, they turn around. This is the wedding that Griffin and Brianna's wedding. Imagine that right after they have these wedding vows, 15 minutes later, one of them is breaking the vows right off the bat. That's essentially what's happening. And so there is this covenant, there is this promise that I'm going to be your people, or we'll be your people, and you're going to be our God. But they don't live like that. It's like being in a marriage that we're married, but I have no obligation to do anything or have anything to do with you. But we're married, though. The status is still there, but I don't have any obligations to follow that.
Yeah, and even as we read there in verse 25 of Judges 21, Israel had no king. Everyone did what? As they saw fit. What was right in their eyes. What should they be doing? Everyone should be living and making choices as God saw fit, or what was right in God's eyes. They're not doing that.
Because that's the covenant
that's right, but that's their choice.
Mm-hmm.
There was a king there. They weren't following the king. Go ahead.
You're saying there's a king there. Do you think that was the issue? Like God was not there, like as a physical person. Do you think that was the issue?
That's what they say. Right, but that's
Which that's God's point, is like we're not going to be like the other nations. The way that we're going to live is going to be different.
He told them that before they got there in the first place.
But they sit and they look around, they're like, but that guy, they like, so they come in and they're, what's the word? Antagonists almost the whole time is the Canaanites. In some way, form, or fashion, the Canaanites are always the ones that are like trying to pull them away and stuff like that. And so here they are living and they've got this covenant with God, but they see some cultures and some other people groups and stuff that have lots of things and lots of wealth and possessions and stuff. That's whenever they went into the land and they went and explored Canaan and saw all this stuff, they're impressed by it. Do you guys remember what the spies came back with after they went and saw it?
Yeah.
Grapes that had to be
giant clusters of grapes
held between two people is so much. And then the people are huge. Think they're living in tents. They're nomads trying to like establish like
in
little
the
cities
desert.
and village in the deserts and stuff. And then you see these people that have culture, art, literature.
Well, and there's grass and there's rivers and there's
Wow.
it's amazing.
And not only that, this is consistent through the whole book of Judges. Sex, and not just any sex. It's particular. I was just reading through some of this stuff of like how come how come they're consistently being drawn away by these people, and these other people, they worship this god named Baal, who we've talked about before. But so they would have priestesses and priests that.
Well, he also had a wife named Ashtoreth or Asherah. Mm-hmm.
That was she was a fertility god.
Yeah,
and,
they were both fertility god and
that's right.
goddess. Mm-hmm.
So to worship this god, you go and have sex with one of the priests or priestesses, and so you're combining worship and religion with
Sexual
sexuality.
intercourse. Yeah.
And if that's not, well, number one, the most fatal of attractions that I feel like you could possibly have, but that's really attractive to, I mean, anybody, I guess,
Yeah.
but for sure the Israelites have like, God has made some covenants of like, what was it, in the 10 Commandments, one of them is like, listen, man, you're faithful to one woman, and that's your person. We're not jealous of another person's wife. But over here in Joe Schmo land, I can worship God by having sex with a priest. That sounds
and then he was saying like, how do you worship your God? Oh, we take a bull and we slit its throat and then we barbecue it. Oh, well, we get to have sex with random women and call it worship. Like, there's a draw there.
Well, yeah.
So there's a lot of different temptations, a lot of different things that pull them away. Now, going back to Dacey's question, this has been a problem for God's people even up till nowadays. I mean, how often do we were even talking about this with last week when we were talking about the rich man and Lazarus that died, and the rich man being in torment and telling Abraham in heaven, send Lazarus or somebody back to my brothers and tell them, like, they don't want to end up where I am. And he's like, they got the law, they got the prophets, they can read the stories, they've got the message. If they're not going to believe that, they're not going to believe, somebody comes back from the dead. But we talked about how, like, there's so many times where you're like, man, if God just physically showed up right now, Jesus just like walked through the door, then I would believe. Then I would follow if I had some kind of a sign. And I think God oftentimes is like, holy cow, I'm giving you evidence of my presence all over the place.
Everything you need.
And that's the same problem with his people here. I am your king. I am leading you. I have led you to freedom. I have driven out nations before you. I have provided food for you. I have provided safety for you. I'm doing the things that a king would do on a much grander scale. Yeah, but I'm just going to do what I want to do. And I went through a study when I was at Harding. I had a class that went from Joshua to Esther, like those books in the Old Testament. And we were talking about the book of Judges, which we didn't go through every single story, but he was just talking about this cyclical thing that we're going to see in Judges over and over again, where the Israelites are faithful to God, and then they start following other gods, and then God allows some nation to come and oppress them, and then they feel remorseful, and they apologize to God, and God sends a judge to rescue them, and then everything is fine for a while. Then they worship God, and then they start worshiping other gods. Then God sends an oppressor, and it just keeps happening over and over. And he was talking about my professor was talking about this, and he was talking about some of the miracles that you see in the book of Judges that we're going to talk about. And he's, I just raised my hand in class. It's like, how do they not get it? Why would they walk away from that? If you see your God, spoiler alert for one of the stories that we're going to talk about,
don't do it.
I'm going to do it anyway. Sending giant hailstones down that have no reason on earth to appear, and they rain down on an army that is in the process of trying to defeat you, and those hailstones ended up destroying that army, and there's no other explanation for it except God did that. Why would you not? Why would you stop following that God? Of course I would worship that God and continue following. I don't understand why they kept walking away. I just remember him looking at me in the eye with the classroom of 50 other people and going, Mr. Brown, this is what we do on a daily basis. And I was like, you're right. Because how many things has God done for me? How many ways has he blessed me? And there's no other possible explanation except God did that for me. And yet, what do?
You woke up that morning and you sinned.
I walk away from it. And, yeah, what a coincidence. Yeah. And so that's another thing that's attracted me about the book of Judges is how much I see myself, not necessarily in some of the violent acts and things like that, but just the constant back and forth of faithfulness and unfaithfulness, and not in a beat myself up kind of way, but just recognizing, man, how faithful is God to stick with somebody who continually is unfaithful to him? It's pretty amazing.
The thing for me is that it's the book is very discouraging as a book. Whenever I taught this series to the teenagers, we called it A Tragedy of Broken Heroes, because it's just the whole thing. Even, if you guys got your sheet right here, you see how it goes from down here on the bottom half, but it goes from pretty good, not amazing, like amazing people, just pretty good, to okay to bad to worse. And in chapters 17 to 21, we're gonna finish with some stuff that is shocking.
It's hard to read.
Disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we were shocked with some of the Revelation stuff. This stuff is like, this is real. Like, this stuff happened and all of that. But the encouraging part of that is to, I was told a long time ago that there aren't any real heroes in Judges, because even the good ones are fatally flawed.
Mm-hmm.
Even the ones, I mean, you could have, our VBS could be about Samson. It'd be a little terrifying. But you could have about Samson or Gideon and those kinds of things. And those are some heavy hitters in the book of Judges and stuff too. You look at Samson, guy is messed up. Like his wanting of women cannot be satiated. His wanting for revenge and death and destruction cannot be satiated.
His arrogance,
his disrespect of family and friends,
mm-hmm.
And he dies the way that he lived, very, very violently, and just with a moment of God's presence being in him and all of that. And so here's this cyclical cycle over and over and over again of these bad things that are happening to people. The only hero in the book of Judges is God. He is the only good guy in the book of Judges. Because over and over and over, you have these people that are saying, yeah, we're married, we're good. Oh, fall off the deep end. Oh, we need help. God helps them. Oh, we're married, we're good. Oh, crud, we fall off the deep end. And over and over and over, the only hero that you have in this book really is God's unwavering love for his people.
Yeah.
What brings to mind is when we were studying Judges, or not Judges.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
God didn't want it then.
Yeah.
He wouldn't listen to him.
Right.
God said, no, we don't need a king. You have me.
Yeah.
You do not need a king. But yet we still didn't listen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, we got to have a king.
Yeah.
I mean, we are so stupid.
Yeah.
We are stupid.
Is he talking to the different judges through the book? Is that who he's using as his?
Yeah.
Those are his
Yeah. We're going to jump right into that right now.
freedom
That's a really
fighters,
good
all
question.
that.
So let's jump into it. If you don't like
I'm good
any
for it.
other introductory kind of thoughts.
I mean, I guess that's the thing is that, like, if any of us either here or online are stuck in this cycle of like, why do I keep messing up, and then, oh, I need help, and God bails me out, and then we're going to keep messing up. If we would just try and live like we have a king, if we live a life that we are not doing what's right in our eyes, but what is prescribed, life might be a little bit better and be more bearable.
Guarantee it
Just
would.
a thought.
Yeah. So let's look there in the book of Judges. Now we're going to, unless you got something you want to point out, I'm going to skip chapter 1. Chapter 1 is kind of wrapping up the final push of trying to get these different nations out of the way so that Israel can inhabit this whole land. And Brandon has handed out a map to you to kind of show you the territory that we're talking about. But they basically took over everything between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, and some of the east side of the Jordan River as well. Okay, they didn't get all the way over to the Mediterranean Sea because the nation of the Philistines, Philistia, was there. Although when we get to David and Solomon, the border's kind of extended, but that's a story for another time. I'm not even gonna bother with that. So just basically the areas on either side of the Jordan River, down to the Dead Sea and up past what's now the Sea of Galilee, is the territory that we're talking about. Okay.
Something important to note too is that it's all contextual in the book of Joshua, just so we know. But God was like, "Hey, listen, we're not going in and saying, hey, let me post up right next to y'all." It was, we're driving these people out or completely decimating them because this is our land and they don't need to be here. God was exercising judgment on them because they had lived terrible, not God-fearing lives. And so the conquest of this wasn't just like happenstance. Oh, they're there. Well, that's y'all's land now, so just kill them all. It was all very contextual and stuff. But Israel didn't do what God was asking and left a lot of people in that land still, which ends up being a huge, big downfall for them.
Right. So there's some of these nations that didn't get up and end up getting driven out, and so they either forced them into servitude or learned how to coexist, and those people lived within the borders of Israel, which becomes a problem. That's what God didn't want to happen in the first place. If you go back thousands of years, yeah, because they're all descendants of Noah and the original people that God created, and there was an ability for them to know who God was and to worship God and to have a moral code that God had for them, even if they didn't know how to do all the different sacrifices and stuff that he told the Israelites to do. There was an awareness that there is a God and there is a ethic. There is right and wrong, and that's, I mean, God has designed that into our DNA, but they have walked away from that, and generations of that, they continue to walk away from that. And then once Jacob and all his family, 70 people, leave to go down to Egypt during that famine, now all these other nations take over that territory and just go full tilt into worshiping gods and goddesses and all this sexuality and all these different things that we've talked about. So God, and if you read through, Numbers, if you read through Deuteronomy, God is telling his people in Joshua, when you go into this land, drive those people out, because I'm planting you in the middle of a bunch of people who have walked away from me. And if you don't drive them out and get rid of them, I mean, we know this about ourselves. It's so much easier to pull somebody down than to lift somebody else up, right? They're going to pull you down to their level if you let them continue to live there and you try to coexist with them. So let's just get them, let's drive them out. Yes, ma'am.
Did they carry on with like the Sabbath and the priest and all this during all this?
The Israelites?
Yeah.
Well, they were supposed to. They were supposed to.
I think sometimes they observed, but it was.
But I'll tell you this: when they, is it here in chapter 2? It may be in Joshua. I guess it was in Joshua. When the Israelites crossed the Jordan River with Joshua into the Promised Land, before they marched the circles around Jericho, they observed the Passover. That's in the book of Joshua, I believe it's chapter 5, and it says that's the first time. And I can't remember how long it was. Maybe the 40 years that they were in the wilderness, they hadn't observed the Passover, which was one of the things that God said when they left Egypt. The first Passover was the night that they escaped from Egypt, right? And he's like, do this every year, and it's in the law. Do this all the time. And even in their wandering around the wilderness, they hadn't even done just this one thing. Just observe this particular ceremony, this particular holiday, I guess, every single year. And then they cross the Jordan River, and it's like, okay, we hadn't done this for years. Let's do this.
Come on, now.
And they hadn't. I mean, they circumcised everybody because they had stopped circumcising all the males. Like all the things that they were already supposed to be doing, they had stopped doing by the time they got into the Promised Land. And now
that's one generation difference.
Yeah, and now we get to the book of Judges, and all the people that got to go across the Jordan River, went through circumcision, went through the Passover, watched God knock the walls of Jericho down and drive out all these nations like he said he's going to. That generation dies off, and they don't pass on their faith to the generation behind them, and that becomes the problem. So to answer your question, were they doing Passover type things and the law of Moses kind of stuff? Maybe here and there, but not like they were supposed to.
And that's what's happening today. I mean, it could change. Like you said, one generation,
It's over.
all this would be old.
Yeah. I mean,
It happened to us.
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. It's I mean, Solomon is one that said in Proverbs, train up a child in the way they should go. And when they're old, they won't depart from it, right? Well, what does it tell you about these people were experiencing God's power and presence and deliverance, but they weren't passing on that faith, it seems like, to their kids. So look at chapter 2 here, though. I'm going to read verses 1 through 5. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land that I swore to give to your forefathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet, what? You have disobeyed me.
Dang it.
Why have you done this? Now, therefore, I tell you that I will not drive them out before you. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. And when the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud. And they called that place Bochim, which means weepers. And there they offered sacrifice to the Lord. So here's just a statement right here at the beginning of the book of Judges. Like, here's the status of Israel at this point. There's still some of the nations here. They still haven't been driven out. Why? Because you already did what I said not to do. And you already didn't do what I said to do. You've already broken the covenant. You've already disobeyed.
Already.
Yeah.
Already broken.
Yeah. So they weep and they're sad about it. Okay. But doesn't end there. Let's skip down to verse 10. Here's what I was just talking about, Linda, in answer to your question. Look at Judges chapter 2 and verse 10. After that, talking about after Joshua died, his death is described in verses 8 and 9. After that whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up who knew what? Neither what? The Lord nor what he had done. So, again, this generation watched all these things happen. They believed in God. You got this whole generation that didn't believe God could lead them into the promised land. And God said, well, then you're not going to go to the promised land. They died in the wilderness. Their kids get to go into the promised land and get to experience God doing all these miraculous things and showing his power and driving out these nations. But they didn't pass on that faith to their kids. And now the next generation
to tell those
got
stories.
this one generation wedged in between these two. But yeah, how do you not pass that on to your kids? But it's a whole generation that and I will say it uses the word they knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. That word know is like the Greek word for know in the New Testament. The Hebrew word here is an experiential knowledge. They didn't have the same experience with God that their parents did. Maybe it's because they didn't get to see the miracles and only heard the stories about it, or maybe their parents didn't tell them about it, or maybe a combination of both. But they just didn't have that experiential relationship with God that their parents did.
I think it's, the majority, I guess there's really 3 generations represented in this room and stuff too. But I imagine that it's difficult to have something that your generation went through that's very impactful to you as a person, faith-wise, nationality-wise, all that stuff, and then you try and tell your kids about it, and they're like, yeah. Like for Daisy and I know that we will be able to tell our children about 9/11, as all of you and your children got to experience and everything. But my children will be like, wow, that sounds terrible. And it will not have the same impact of being able to live through it and watch the live footage from New York and all of that stuff. And it only takes one generation to be like, yeah, Memorial Day, that's cool, but it's a day off for us to have barbecue. And
There's a lot of people that say Holocaust never happened.
yeah.
Right.
And that was within, people are still alive from all those things happen. But that's how quickly the impact of watching God save his people and then bring them through this conquest and miraculous. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I'll just continue living my life.
Yeah, so let's keep reading and we'll get you a better description of why we have to have these judges, okay? I left off in verse 10. Let's pick up in verse 11. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. Now, Baal is one of the main gods we're going to come across multiple times, this different god of the Canaanites. Verse 12, they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them up out of Egypt. The author of Judges is doubling down here. It's like they didn't just forsake a random God. They forsook the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt.
He's not forgetting.
And they followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They provoked the Lord to anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord handed them over to raiders who plundered them. He sold them to their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them, and they were in great distress.
Oh, no.
So,
if it isn't the consequences of our own actions. Oh, no.
So he really gets really blunt and really direct. This is why. This is the source of the problem. And I will say, if you go back and look in Deuteronomy, this is what God said would happen. We're going to have this covenant. We're going to have this relationship. I'm going to take care of you. You're going to follow me. And if you don't, here's what's going to happen. And one of the things that's going to happen is your enemies are going to defeat you, and they're going to carry away your sons and daughters, and they're going to take away all your stuff. Like, this was like foreshadowing. This is God telling you ahead of time.
Covenant.
If you keep the covenant, here's all the awesome stuff that's going to happen. If you don't, here's the bad stuff that's going to happen. So they don't. So the bad stuff happens.
When you tell your kids, listen, here's yes and no, and you get to choose. And then whenever no happens, they're very surprised that you actually come through with your, consequences. And it's like, they should not be surprised because they told him, they knew, they signed up for this covenant.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll keep going. Verse 16. Then the Lord raised up judges. Now I've got a footnote that says leaders. This isn't necessarily this isn't a guy sitting in black robes with a gavel, commuting sentences. This is leader would probably be a more apt description. Now, sometimes they would probably settle legal cases and stuff like that, but it's just who the people look to first of all make decisions for them. Yep. Second of all, tell them, how to live their lives. Third of all, whenever possible, lead them into battle. Okay, that's what these judges were. God raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Okay, awesome. God sends people to save us. Whoa. That's what it says there in verse 16. And then what does the very next verse say? Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves. And that's an intentional word there. Ooh. They prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiped them. Okay? This is like God's spouse going and sleeping with a prostitute. That's how he felt about Israel.
And sending somebody to bring them back. And they're like, no. I'm here. I'm here for the prostitutes.
Yeah. Unlike their fathers, they quickly turned from the way in which their fathers had walked, the way of obedience to the Lord's commands. Verse 18, whenever the Lord would raise up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies, as long as the judge lived. For the Lord had compassion on them as they groaned under those who oppressed and afflicted them. Verse 19, but when the judge died, what did the people do? They returned to their ways, even more corrupt than those of their fathers, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. So, again, here at the beginning of the book, here in chapter 2, the author of Judges is laying out for you what you are about to see repeat itself over and over throughout this book. People are being blessed by God. They prostitute themselves to these other gods. They begin worshiping these other gods and walk away from Jehovah God. God allows raiders to come in and plunder them and oppress them and make their lives miserable. They groan and complain. God has mercy and compassion and sends someone to lead them out of that oppression and to rescue them and to make their lives better. And they are devoted to God for a little while. But then as soon as that judge dies, as soon as that leader dies, they go back to worshiping these other gods. And then God allows an oppressor to come in and plunder them and take away stuff and make their lives miserable. And then they groan to God. And I mean, you could just read this paragraph over and over throughout this book because this is what's going to happen over and over.
That's the story that's laid on top of all of the stories of like, hey, are you surprised? They did not follow God. There's a judge that saves them. Woohoo! Then they do it again. And it's like this map that's just laid onto every single story. But the worst part...
Yeah, go ahead.
That is just in 19. Whenever the judge died, the people returned. And their ways were even more corrupt than those of their ancestors. So each time that the process happens... It's
they get
like
a little worse.
Level 2, level 3, level 4, which is, I mean, in this thing, it pans it out. By the very, very end, think about this marriage covenant that they've got. They have broken every single imaginable covenantal promise that they have made with God over and over and over and over again. And it's a miracle that God, I mean, it's only God. It's a miracle that God does not just say, yeah, this was a good idea, and let's just move over to like America, do something with Americans or something, let's just be done with the Israelites.
Yeah.
But he doesn't.
So this is the process. And then when you get into, I'll just skip the last paragraph or so of the chapter, and you get into chapter 3, the first few verses there, chapter 3, you get a list of all the nations that are going to continue to be a problem for him. And it even says in verse 1, these are the nations the Lord left to test all those Israelites who had not experienced any of the wars in Canaan. Verse 4, they were left to test the Israelites to see whether they would obey the Lord's commands. And even that language is kind of bothersome to some people because it almost seems like manipulative on God's part. Like, like it's almost like a puppet master kind of, seeing
Ooh,
what people are
uniform,
going to do. Yeah. And so that word test, I don't know, that's kind of the imagery that comes up in my mind, but it's not God being mean or vindictive or manipulative or, it is God, how do you know if somebody's going to be faithful or not unless there's a temptation, right? It's God allowing the temptation to continue to be there, and hoping.
Yeah.
Right. It's a way of teaching, testing, but also I think there's hope on God's part. Like, this will be the time. We have to do that with our kids, right? Our kids make mistakes. We're like, don't do that again. But sometimes we leave the thing there because we hope that they'll make the right choice this time. We hope so, and I think that's the way God is with his people too.
Well, that's the hope for us. I mean, what does it say in Hebrews? That all those tests and trials are to make us more disciplined, to make us more faithful followers. And I think of whenever I was a young kid, I was really frustrated. Well, not really. A guy that was giving up a communion talk, and he was like, never pray for patience. Don't pray for patience. And I'm a small kid. I'm like, what? I want more patience. Of course I'm going to pray for patience. But why would you not pray for patience? What's the benefit?
Because then God's going to give it to you.
On the way home from church, it's going to be every red light, people cutting you off in traffic. They don't have your favorite entree at the Mexican restaurant. Your kids are on like drugs and stuff. Like, it's absolutely crazy. But it's the testing of your faith that proves your faith to be true.
Yeah.
And so here he's allowing these tests to happen to say, like, okay, this time, trust that I am the king. Trust that I am your God. Trust that I am the one. You follow in my ways, that things are going to be good. But they fail the test, and so they're falling down. And so test does, I think it brings with it the connotation of like, come on, God, like just let him go.
Yeah.
But how many of our children, how many of us would be the people that we are right now without God's testing and trials to prove that our faith is real?
Well, and we also talked about in our Revelation class recently how loving it is. If you think about it, how loving it is that God gives us a choice. We are not robots with no choice of our own. And God always gives us the freedom to choose because he cares about us that much. And he doesn't force us to do things his way. He just says, if you don't do things my way, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be problems, and how loving is it for God to be like, man, I want you guys to love me. I want you to choose me. Well, if there's not a choice, how do I choose? Does that make sense?
Yep.
So it's really in a unique way. It's a way of God demonstrating his desire for his people to desire him and to want to choose him. Yes, ma'am.
Does it still apply today?
I think so. I don't think that I don't want to go down this road here at the end of class too far. I don't want to go too far down this road. But I've shared with this class before, I don't believe in the concept of predestination as far as God has already determined not only who's saved and who's unsaved, but that I don't have any choice in that. And that like the irresistible grace concept where I'm just like almost mind controlled to believe in God. I don't think God operates that way, and I don't think he ever has. And that's not just a New Testament thing. Going back all the way here to the Old Testament, God is like, there are other gods and goddesses out there, and you have the freedom to choose them. Please don't. Bad stuff is going to happen if you do, but it's still your choice. And that's what even that verse there in chapter 2 says. They refused to give up their evil ways. It was their choice. I will rescue you. I have rescued you. Now let's stay in this relationship with each other. But it's still your choice. You want to stay with me or you want to walk away? And every time they were like, we're walking away. But it's a loving God that keeps welcoming them, rescuing them, and welcoming them back over and over again. Which, yeah, I think he does that for us too. Thank God praise God that he does that, you know.
I know that to be true for sure in my life of that, especially with all the stuff that happened with our two oldest kiddos. Of man, those are some trials, and that was some suffering, and that was some like palpable evil that you could just like see, and that was very hard for me to figure out. But
the situation that they were in before
yes,
they
the
came
situation
to
they
your
were there
house.
before, and trying to figure out all of that stuff. But man, if I didn't become the most prayerful person that I have ever been in my whole life because of that, and if those things wouldn't have happened, probably pray half as less or half
as much.
Half as much. Thank you.
Yeah.
half as less. Half as much because of that. And as terrible and evil those things are, it's God. No, it is. It's God wooing. Hold on. It's God wooing them in me towards Him, and it's like I would take those trials all day long, not for them and stuff, but because I'm like closer to God for that, and they're closer to God for that, and so. It's man, I think it was like Stephen Colbert or something like that he had lost his mom to cancer or something like that, and he was like, I see it as a good thing now because even those even the terribleness of that, even the wounds of God are graces, I think is what he said. Even the wounds of those things are like things that draw us closer, and I'm here for that. So
Yeah.
that was a weird emotional moment. Sorry. Judges, man.
It's
like,
I appreciate you sharing though. I really do. So just two things real quick because we need to wrap up. One is this whole book, there's two different schools of thought as to how long a time period we're talking about. And it really depends on when you believe in history the Israelites came out of Egypt. So they either came out in 1400 BC or 1290 BC, one of the two. And so not that this matters, I'm just kind of telling you
the win.
There's two different schools of thought on how much time takes place here. If you go with the older time, it was in the 1440s, I think, BC when they came out of Egypt. People look at that day and go, okay, also the Judges takes about 400 years. When you get from Joshua to Samuel is about 400 years. And that's fine. If it may have been 400 years. And you can also do the math on when you just add up all these different judges and how long they were judges over Israel, it'll come up to 400 plus years. So
it's a long time.
That could work. Or if it's the I guess the later date of 1290, you take that, and then also the fact that a lot of these judges, there could be, I won't say probably, there's a lot of scholars that think there's overlap here. That this isn't necessarily a judge, like it'll say, this person judged Israel, but it may be more of a, if you look on your maps, like a territorial kind of area that they were leaders of, and not the entire nation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It might be 2 or 3 tribes in that area, not the entire nation. So there could be some overlap between some of these judges. One was judging for 20 years here, and maybe 15 years into that judgeship, somebody else started being a judge down here.
Term.
And so if that's the case, then you're looking at more like 100, 150 years that this time frame was. In the grand scheme of things, does it matter? Not really. But just to kind of let you know, this isn't like thousands of years we're talking about. It is at least 100 years up to 400 years. I was reading one commentary today that said split the difference like 300,
Sounds good.
So I'm saying all that to say we do need to think about sometimes this isn't necessarily talking about the entire nation following this one particular person. It's probably more geographical around where that person was and where that particular oppression was coming from. That doesn't negate the power of the story, but just kind of let you know there might be some people up here in the north that weren't as aware of what was going on down in the south. Or they might hear the stories, but they're not necessarily impacted as much. Does that make sense?
This is kind of like the minor prophets that we worked through 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was right before Revelation, so last
Yeah,
year.
of like you've got prophets that are happening in the north. Yeah, it feels like years ago. Some prophets that are happening in the north and some prophets that are happening
Yeah.
in the south.
Yeah.
But they're kind of happening at the same time because
Yeah.
it's, so where's the overlap there?
Yes. And the other thing that I was going to wrap up with today is just to invite you guys to read through this. It's not, or at least read through, the first couple of these stories. Next week we'll talk about the first one. It was probably mispronounced when I was a kid, but I'm in the habit of saying Othniel, but I know it's probably easier to say Othniel. I think I've heard most other people say Othniel, but whoever taught me the story in the first place said Othniel. So I can't break that habit. Othniel, Othniel, whatever. We'll talk about him, and he doesn't take a long time to talk about. So we may go ahead and get into Ehud, which is one of my more favorite judges to talk about.
Heck yeah.
So we'll start maybe talking about. Maybe we'll get through both of them next week, but we'll at least get through.
Probably spend a couple weeks on Shamgar, who has literal one verse.
Yes.
So that's Judges 3 and 4.
Yes. We'll try to do Judges 3 and 4 next week. We'll for sure do 3. I'm sorry. No, we won't get to 4. We'll do chapter 3 next week.
Yeah.
Those first 2 judges.
Yeah, if you guys are looking,
Yeah.
for
No,
things
I turned
to,
the page. I was like, I don't remember it being 4.
Hold on a second.
No. We ain't getting into
No,
Deborah next
no
week for
way.
sure. But we'll for sure get Othniel taken care of, and hopefully Ehud too.
If you're looking for things to work through this week and focus on, chapters 1, 2, and 3 would be really good to just kind of sit down with for a while and kind of get acquainted with the cycle.
Yep, for sure. Okay, I think that's all we're going to cover for today. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming. Stay safe. Hope you get everything cleaned up that's fallen at your house or in your neighborhood.
I'll go look for the. It's like the multi-prong splitter. I think we've got.